What's up, guys? This is Anime Crossover. I'm back with another episode of What If Naruto Was the Speed God Part 6. And if you did enjoy this video, give this video a like. And if you're new to my channel and like my content, subscribe and hit that notification bell for more crossover fiction with a twist. Now let's begin this new video.
Ghost in the Shell, Chapter 14. When Death heard footsteps behind her, she looked out the window. When she turned around, she felt a severe ache in her belly and was propelled through the building. She stopped rolling on the ground and grumbled as she forced herself up. She felt something drip down her cheek and it rolled off. Impossible, Death grumbled as she glanced at the blood on her cheek from the wound. She moaned loudly in pain as she felt a searing feeling on her abdomen and looked down to see a bright sign on her flesh. She looked up when she heard footfall again and saw a man in a leather jacket and slacks, but what astonished her the most was that the man's entire head was a blazing skull. The man approached Death, who attempted to vanish but was unable to do so. The man came to a halt and turned over his shoulder just in time to see Reaper launch him away from Death. Reaper drew his pistols and fired at the man, who shrugged off each blast as if it were nothing. "Who are you?" Reaper inquired as the man came to a halt. "Vengeance," the man said before picking up a chain and lighting it on fire. Reaper grabbed Death, and they both vanished as Reaper transformed into black smoke and flew away. As they retreated, the man sneered at them and flung the chain over his shoulder and back up around him, tightening around him. Whistling, a burning motorcycle sped over to the man, who climbed aboard and chased after the pair. When he spotted the soaring smoke, he yanked off his chain and tossed it forward, the end wrapping around Death's leg. Death yanked her out, crashed hard on the earth, and hacked up blood. He grabbed her neck after getting off his bike and peered into her terrified eyes before Reaper shot him in the head. As the flames repaired his skull, the man staggered back, dropping Death in the process. Death was snatched by Reaper and hurried up into the sky. Rio, Starfire, and Cyborg stood by as Raven went through a training exercise against several robots. "So, how are things with you and Zatanna?" Cyborg inquired. "It's all good," Rio replied as she folded her arms. "She got her soul back and everything is fine." "You don't sound happy about that," Starfire observed. "I'm still pissed that she sold her soul," Rio stated before turning off the robots. "That's enough for now, Raven." Raven approached her team and examined each member. "Who's next?" she inquired. "I guess I'll go," Rio remarked as she took a step forward. Just as Rio was about to put on her armor, Reaper collapsed in front of her, Death rolling out of his arms and groaning in anguish. "Help her!" shouted Reaper to Rio, who dashed over to Death and checked on her while the rest of the Titans went to assist Reaper. Rio grabbed Death and dragged her out of the room to the med bay, where she began a fast physical. Rio pushed Death's shirt up slightly, feeling a significant amount of heat radiating off her abdomen, and grimaced as she noticed a symbol burned into her flesh. When the others began assisting Reaper, she began working on Death's other ailments. When Reaper took off his mask, his equipment turned into black smoke. "How's she doing?" Sasuke inquired as he sat on an exam table. "Besides the symbol carved into her flesh, she's going to pull through," Rio stated as she applied a cold compress to Death's abdomen and leg. "What happened to you both?" Cyborg inquired. "Mistress was attacked, and I tried to save her," Sasuke explained as Starfire healed a bruise on his brow. The culprit was a man with a flaming skull. Raven and Rio exchanged glances before Rio told her to keep quiet about the situation. "Are you sure you weren't both dreaming?" Raven inquired warily. "If they were dreaming, these wounds wouldn't be real," Rio murmured, finishing the stitches on Death's cheek. "Ghost Rider," Death sighed. "He's called the Ghost Rider." "Ghost Rider?" Rio inquired, his face furrowed. "He's a human possessed by the spirit of vengeance, which sends sinners to hell," Death stated weakly, "but he shouldn't exist in this dimension. He's not a being of this universe." "Well, this is an unexpected plot twist," Rio commented as she began treating Sasuke's injuries. "Why don't you have a soul?" Death inquired, drawing everyone's attention to Rio, who halted. "None of your business," Rio answered calmly after a few moments. "Naruto, tell me," Death replied, his voice severe but still weak. "All you need to know is that Zatanna has hers back," Rio explained as she applied a compress to Sasuke's head. "I'm going to see if John has a spell to remove that thing from her stomach." As Death pushed herself up, she proceeded through a boom tube. She tried to rise up but fell back down. Everyone rushed over to her, and Sasuke drew her to her feet, her arm over his shoulder. "What exactly is that sigil?" Raven inquired. "It took away my powers and turned me mortal," Death explained as Sasuke pulled her back up to the table. "What do you mean?" Cyborg inquired. "The endless don't bleed," Sasuke said as he helped Death lie down again. Bleeding is a sign of mortality. There are very few ways to kill an immortal being, and what's happening to Mistress is the cruelest way for an immortal to die, he said as he led everyone out of the room and toward the main room as Ace entered the med bay to keep an eye on Death as she slept. This forces an immortal to suffer and no pain. So, how do we protect her? Starfire inquired as Sasuke sat on the couch. We have to make sure she doesn't suffer any fatal wounds, Sasuke muttered, trying to clear his mind of the misery. Ace looked about for the source when the lights in the med bay went out. He gazed up at the vents, his inferred vision activated, just as something flew out. It hit him, frying his circuits and knocking him out. Deathstroke fell from the vents when the grating was silently lifted. It was the first time I'd even been defeated, Sasuke stated as he drank heavily from his cup, and the Ghost Rider is possibly the only person who could actually match me. He must be good to get the drop on both of you, Starfire said as Raven attempted to cure Sasuke's burns. I'll give him that, Sasuke remarked as he drank from his cup. He and Raven stood up and faced the corridor. I sense it too, she murmured as they ran down the corridor together. When the door swung open, Deathstroke drew out a knife and approached Death cautiously. He hurled the knife at Sasuke, who deflected it before attacking Deathstroke and dragging him through a window. Raven departed with Death as Starfire and Cyborg entered the room. What just happened? Cyborg inquired. Mountain Justice. Raven arrived from the shadows with Death next to her while Calder and Robin were exercising. Raven, what's going on? Calder said as he and Robin rushed to take Death from her. Deathstroke tried to kill her at the tower, Raven revealed. This is Death, by the way. Why would Deathstroke want to kill her? Robin wondered before being thrown down by something descending from the ceiling. Spinning around, Robin noticed a girl about 2 years his junior dressed in what appeared to be a variant of Batgirl's attire, but with a full face mask, white eyes, and no hair showing. The girl charged towards Robin, kneeing him in the gut. Raven yelled, Azareth Metreon Zinthos, as she blasted a beam towards the girl. The girl threw a luminous ball at Raven's strike, which easily scattered it. Raven was shocked and passed out on the floor after being kicked in the head by the female. SS-01, SS-02, SS-03, SS-4, SS-06 override, it looks like the little birdie got his wings clipped, Harley murmured, approaching Robin and kneeling in front of him. How did you get in here? Robin asked as Harley rose to his feet. Wouldn't you like to know? Harley said with a smile before slamming her bat on the outside of his head. Deadshot fired an electric dart at Calder, who shrieked in pain before collapsing. As a circular gateway emitting sparks emerged close to Killer Croc, he snatched up the unconscious Death and flung her over her shoulder. As the female in the bat costume approached Ghost Rider, he walked out of the portal. Ghost Rider ruffled her cowl and seized the groaning Robin, whose mask was torn and his eyes were showing. Robin locked gazes with Ghost Rider before wailing in agony. As the Suicide Squad all went for the portal, Ghost Rider dumped the unconscious Robin. Superboy B-04 and Miss Martian B-05 have been identified. Connor and Megan walked and gasped as the Suicide Squad exited the vortex with Death. Hey, Connor said as he charged Ghost Rider. To the amazement of the Superman clone, the blazing skeleton grabbed Connor's hand and threw green dust in his face. Connor coughed loudly as he abruptly lost all strength, just as a wall of flame appeared in front of Megan. As Ghost Rider exited the portal, she dropped to her knees. Computer. Alert the League, Megan muttered as she went out as the flames and portal closed. After 5 minutes, Death groaned and picked herself up from the chilly ground, her head throbbing. She looked through the cell bars at Ghost Rider, who was leaning on the opposite wall, observing her. Why are you doing this? She inquired, her expression pinched. I made a deal, Ghost Rider stated before walking away. While Batman, Black Canary, Zatara, and Superman discussed what had happened to Wally, Zatanna, Artemis, Starfire, and Cyborg, Reaper clenched his fists and gazed at the downed Raven and members of Young Justice. Rio gazed between Reaper and the heroes as a boom tube opened between them. How long was I gone? She inquired. Long enough for Ghost Rider to take Mistress with the help of Deathstroke, the Suicide Squad, and a young girl who easily defeated your friends, grumbled Reaper. The Suicide Squad managed to gain entrance to the cave and defeated Robin and Aqualad as well as Raven before Ghost Rider came and put Robin in a coma, Batman recounted as Constantine entered the boom tube. It's called the Penance Stare, Constantine explained as he glanced at Batman. When the Ghost Rider locks eyes with a target, it forces them to experience all the sin they inflicted in their lifetime. It sears the soul and, if done for a long enough period of time, it will burn the soul to cinders. Are you able to reawaken Robin? Black Canary inquired. Dealing with souls still inside the body isn't my specialty, Constantine stated with a shake of his head. The only thing that could wake him up would be death herself. What was your deal? Reaper inquired. Sorry. Constantine questioned, as everyone looked at Reaper. Not you, Reaper continued, his attention fixed on Rio. What deal did you make with Ghost Rider? Rio chuckled, which turned into a laugh, before smiling at Reaper. You really think I'd make a deal with him? Rio slyly asked. He'd kill me the moment he laid eyes on me. Rio was pushed against the wall by Reaper, who had his hand around her throat. I'm not playing games, Naruto, Reaper spit out. What was your deal? My soul for Zatanna's, Rio remarked before disappearing and reappearing next to Constantine. Zatara shouted, What? Rio, you promised you wouldn't do that, Zatanna said, stunned. He'd have noticed the next time he tried to train you because a magic user's power weakens when they don't have a soul, Rio remarked before walking away from the wall. Hey, where are you going? Artemis inquired. I'm going to do some training, Rio explained. Are you kidding me? Shouted Wally. Our friends were attacked, and you're just brushing it off like it's nothing. I can't get involved, Rio sighed, turning around. The deal I made with Mephisto forbids me from interfering with the rider. You did what? Shouted Constantine, Zatara, and Zatanna simultaneously. I think I just went deaf, Rio replied, cleaning her ear. You made a deal with the devil? Constantine screamed fiercely, are you fucking insane? What would you do if the person you love couldn't even feel the touch of a hand on their cheek? Yelled Rio before turning on Zatanna, and you, Savitar may have been in control of my body, but I could still see everything. You were miserable and I did what I thought was right. When flames started to flare around Rio, everyone took a step back. I've put everything I've got into trying to live here and keep my promise to that girl. Rio cried as her face began to smoke, but clearly, I shouldn't have even bothered with helping any of you. Rio had vanished in a torrent of flames, and when the flames died down, everyone stared at the burned earth where Rio had been. Is she dead? Zatanna inquired. No, Reaper said, she's just off trying to cool her head, before looking at Superman and saying, Mistress is being held in Bulgaria, we should get going. I'll contact other League members when we get there, Superman remarked as he, Reaper, the rest of the Justice League, and Constantine moved toward the Zeta Beam platform. Yo, what about us? Cyborg inquired. You will all remain on standby until further notice, Batman said. You can't be serious, screamed Artemis, they've hurt our friends, and we're not going to stand by and watch. You don't have a choice, Zatara stated as he walked over to the computer and entered a command. Lockdown. Involved, I'm sorry, Superman apologized, but we can't have you all go after the Suicide Squad because they're too dangerous. Constantine and Reaper entered a boom tube, while the Justice League members exited via the Zeta Beam platform. Great, cried Wally. Now, what are we supposed to do? Code. Dark override, sorry about that. Constantine apologized as he re-entered the cave on the Zeta Beam platform with Reaper, Cheshire, Katana, Blood, and a big plant-like thing as Deadman came through the wall. We had to make sure that we wouldn't be disturbed. What is all this? Starfire inquired. It's something Rio had been working on in secret, Raven explained as she emerged from the back. We mostly deal with the occult, Blood continued. We, my dear children, are Justice League Dark. After 3 hours, when she heard footsteps, Death sat alone in her cell, her stomach growling in hunger. Are you having fun? Destiny inquired. Why are you here? Death, her brother, inquired. I'm seeing what your punishment is, Destiny inquired, pretty fitting for the crime. So, I fell in love with Naruto and had kids, Death said. What's so wrong with that? You fell in love, Destiny explained, an act forbidden to us by mother and father. It's not something I intended to do, Death cried quietly. I had only intended to try and console him on his parents' death, and I never expected to have this feeling grow inside of me. Death reached into her pocket and drew out a faded photograph of 2 young children. Those first few days, I couldn't even get him to speak to me, Death recounted with a sorrowful smile, but I grew to understand his pain. For the first time, I understood what destruction meant when he said I couldn't bear the pain I was causing those who survived to live another day. That may be true, but you have postponed that human's death for far too long, Destiny remarked, turning away from the cell, and now that she has no soul, your power cannot affect her. I hope you have made your peace. How could that happen when I abandoned them? Death wondered to herself. I left without saying anything, and I doubt any of them would forgive me. I have a feeling they would, Destiny replied as he walked away. What do you mean by that? Shouted Death as she ran to the bars, hoping to see Destiny but finding him gone. Destiny, get your ass back here. Don't walk out on me, get back here. That's it, Cyborg said, looking down at the castle in the valley below them. I can feel Mistress' presence coming from there, Reaper explained. She's in there. Why don't we just go in? Wally suggested, going several feet before collapsing against an illusory wall. That's one of the reasons, Blood explained as Artemis proceeded to assist Wally. Beyond that barrier is a small army guarding that castle, which has the Suicide Squad in there. And how are we supposed to get through? Artemis wondered. Evamer Eht Rearab, Zatanna said, her voice echoing. Cracks emerged throughout the huge dome that appeared over the valley before shattering with a loud smash. Was that supposed to happen? Cheshire wondered as gunmen opened fire on them. Looks like we've got company, Deadshot said as he noticed footage from outside on his sight. Our orders are clear, Enchantress stated, we're to guard that woman until he returns. I'm sick of waiting, Killer Croc snarled, so let's go kill them. That wouldn't be wise, El Diablo explained, we have to stay put. The Suicide Squad turned to face Deathstroke as he emerged from the shadows. How about we introduce them to a couple of our new friends? He suggested before nodding to Harley. Harley smiled and pressed a console button. Artemis ducked behind a tree to evade a bunker's fire before pointing an arrow through the gap. A blur pushed him off his feet, and she looked up to see a man in his mid-20s with white hair and wearing a tracksuit walk by her. You didn't see that coming? The man asked before speeding away. Artemis attempted to shoot at him, but he had already vanished. She then collapsed as a gunshot passed through her hip. Cheshire rushed over to her sister's side when she saw this. Katana took a look around before being thrown into the air by a blur. She rose to her feet and took a glance around. We have a fast meta in the field, she stated emphatically. Artemis is down, Cheshire exclaimed anxiously as the bunker fired on them while she attended to her sister's medical needs. Can someone take care of that bunker? Swamp Thing charged in and ripped through the concrete with scarcely a scratch. Kid Flash noticed the man running by and pursued him. Looking behind him, the man scoffed and shook his head as Kid Flash followed him before vanishing from view of the young hero. Kid Flash was about to come to a halt when he hit a tree and didn't recognize it. I hate this guy, he said over the intercom. Jason, I think it's time to let your better half out, Constantine suggested as he and Blood crept behind some trees. I hate to say it, but I think you're right, Blood replied before exhaling deeply. Gone the fall man. He dropped to all fours as his body was instantly engulfed in hellfire before blowing out. His physique had transformed into that of a demonic entity dressed in medieval armor. Arise, Etrigan, said Etrigan as he rose to his feet and breathed fire into his hands. Etrigan raced over to Artemis, pulling a blade from the flames, and Cheshire placed Artemis over his shoulder. Cheshire dashed across the woodland toward the castle as Etrigan took her sister away. Reaper pursued the man in the tracksuit but quickly lost sight of him. That guy is too fast, Kid Flash stated as he approached Reaper. Coral him this way, Reaper explained, I'll create a portal and you get him in it. Got it, Kid Flash remarked as he rushed away. Reaper transformed into smoke and traveled in a vertical circle. Inside the portal, the smoke transformed to sparks with a city beyond the veil. Kid Flash pursued the man in the tracksuit and led him to Reaper. When he saw the portal, he smirked and turned. After calculating the man's velocity, Cyborg fired his arm cannon at him, sending him hurtling through the portal. As he regenerated, Reaper hastily closed the portal and exhaled with relief. When a crimson wisp of something flew in front of Starfire's face, she landed within a cave beneath the castle. Turning around, she observed nothing unusual until turning around again and finding herself outside, staring at the bodies of her pals. A woman a few years her senior, with waist-length black hair, stood in the center of the bodies. Commander, shouted Starfire, flying at the woman in wrath. Starfire had no idea she wasn't attacking the person she believed she was. Instead, she had her hands around Zatanna's neck, suffocating her with her superhuman power. When Starfire jumped off Zatanna, she gagged and battled for air. Wow, Starfire exclaimed, surprised, this chick's head is really messed up. Thanks, Boston, Zatanna replied as she fought to catch her breath. Deadman exited Starfire, knocking the girl out, before being blasted through a mental energy wall. Looking in the area where the energy was coming from, Zatanna noticed a woman with red hair wearing plain attire. The woman launched a psychic energy ball towards Zatanna, who grabbed Starfire and leapt out of the way of the attack. Deadman emerged from behind the wall, possessing the woman. As Deadman fought to maintain control, the woman lurched around. We've got a problem, grumbled the woman, this girl's a psychic. Reaper swooped into the room and, as before, established a portal. Throw her in, shouted Reaper. The woman took off running before leaping toward the portal, with Deadman exiting at the last second. When the woman was finished, Reaper dispelled the gateway and got down on one knee. "Are you alright?" Zatanna said as she and Deadman approached Reaper. "I've never done that twice in one day," Reaper stated before disappearing from the room in a green light. In a flash of green light, everyone appeared in a vast room and glanced around. "How did we get here?" Kid Flash inquired. "Such an ignorant boy," Enchantress murmured as everyone shifted their attention to the Suicide Squad. "I'm a little disappointed in you, Katana," Deadshot said to the masked woman wielding the blade. "And I'd like to remind you that I'm not a criminal like the rest of you," Katana said. "Can't we all just deal with this like normal, civilized people?" Constantine wondered. Kid Flash was slammed into a wall and turned to stone. "I guess that's out of the question," Cheshire replied as she took off her mask and tossed it away. "Mr. West," Constantine stated as he snapped his fingers, restoring Kid Flash's normalcy, "you and the other children go look for Death. Boston, follow them. The rest of us will handle these people." "Got it," Kid Flash remarked as he, Artemis, Zatanna, Cyborg, who had Starfire on his shoulder, and Raven walked down a hall while the Suicide Squad and Justice League Dark, with Reaper, began their battle. Death raised her head and walked up to the bars after hearing the explosions above. She closed her eyes and spun around, looking down either end of the darkness. They sprung open when she felt a hand grab her throat and peered into the Ghost Rider's eyes. Her eyes became serene as she refused to struggle. "Go ahead," Death murmured, her tears streaming down her face. "Do it. I deserve it." Death looked at Ghost Rider for a time before dropping her. The Ghost Rider strode out then along the hall, waving his hand at the bars, which melted. While Cheshire was busy dodging Harley's swinging hammer, Katana grunted beneath the impact of Deathstroke's katana. Meanwhile, Swamp Thing was fighting Killer Croc with brutal force, and Reaper was engaged in a shootout with Deathstroke. Constantine was now blocking Enchantress's blows with the best barrier he could manage, while El Diablo attempted to break through as well. "What I wouldn't give for Etrigan to be here," Constantine remarked before noticing his barrier cracking. The barrier shattered, throwing him unconscious and knocking him off his feet. "John!" exclaimed Cheshire as Harley smacked her in the back, knocking her to the ground next to Constantine. Swamp Thing's arms were severed by Killer Croc, who then slammed him against the wall. Deathstroke threw Soultaker into the air before kicking Katana to her allies. When Reaper realized this, he lowered his pistols. With smoke engulfing him, Enchantress drew the Suicide Squad and Deathstroke to her and set up a barrier to deflect Reaper's lasers. When Reaper was through, he got down on one knee in the room he'd nearly wrecked. "Damn it," Reaper grumbled, "I barely have any strength left." "That was very impressive," Deathstroke stated as he approached Reaper and pressed his katana on the man's neck. "But you lack restraint when using that power." A roar rang around the area as Ghost Rider appeared through a doorway. He swung it after grabbing the chain from around his shoulder. It wrapped around Enchantress's waist, surprising everyone. Ghost Rider yanked Enchantress away from her host, June Moore, and physically grasped the ghost by the arms. Before looking into Ghost Rider's eyes, the ghost attempted to break free. Ghost Rider then grasped the ghost's neck and yanked it to its knees. Ghost Rider poured flames into the face of the screaming ghost, turning it to cinders that burned out. Before El Diablo intervened, Ghost Rider let out a deep growl and turned to face the rest of the squad and Justice League Dark. "All of you, get out," he whispered as he locked his gaze on Ghost Rider's. "I'll hold him off." El Diablo was engulfed in flames, transforming him into a gigantic Mayan-like deity made completely of fire. As El Diablo attacked, Ghost Rider chuckled and both began blasting flames at each other. As everything erupted, demolishing the castle, Ghost Rider laughed with delight. Everyone within the castle, with the exception of El Diablo, materialized in the forest outside the bomb radius and gazed about. "How did we get here?" Kid Flash inquired before Reaper shoved him away. "Are you alright, mistress?" inquired Reaper to Death. "I'm fine," Death said, looking around at the Suicide Squad members. Before anyone could react, all of the members passed out and glanced down at them. "You really can't do anything without me," a familiar voice murmured from behind a tree. They turned around to see Moon Knight lounging against a tree, arms folded. "I thought your contract said you couldn't get involved with the Rider," Deadman replied. "I didn't use any magic on the Rider," Moon Knight explained as she continued to look away from everyone. "I used it to get you all out of there." "What about El Diablo?" Artemis inquired. Moon Knight stayed silent and approached Death. Death flinched as she placed a hand on her abdomen and felt a quick chill spread out from where Moon Knight had touched her. Moon Knight moved away and into a boom tube after removing her hand. Death lifted her shirt to see if the insignia had vanished before lowering it to face Justice League Dark, the Teen Titans, and Young Justice. "Thank you all for helping," Death said, raising a hand, This is the least I could do to show my gratitude. Everyone felt the anguish in their bodies dissipate as Constantine and Starfire worked up. Now, I think it's best you all get home, Death stated before flicking her wrist, causing everyone to vanish in an instant. What do we do about them? Reaper and Death inquired, looking down at the unconscious Suicide Squad. Several helicopters rang through the air, and the couple vanished. At a later date, not only did you act against Justice League orders, but you also caused damage to a 500-year-old castle. Batman chided Young Justice and the Teen Titans before turning to Rio, and you also went behind the League's back and created a team outside of our scope. Rio moaned as she rolled her eyes. First and foremost, everyone did real hero work while you all played politics, and I don't see any of you paying for the collateral damage you cause in fights, Rio responded. As for my personal team, we've been preparing for and fighting off the arrival of someone far worse than you've ever seen. But that doesn't excuse the fact that you went behind the League's back, Black Canary pointed out. Yawn, Rio sighed. You all seem to forget that being a hero sometimes means you can't follow protocol when saving people in an emergency. But you also have to have a plan when you go into a situation, Batman explained. Your actions nearly killed the team. I've had enough of this, Rio stated as she approached a boom tube, adding, I'll be with Mina if you need me. Rio walked through the boom tube without even looking back at the startled expressions on everyone's faces in the cave. Rio stepped out of the boom tube and looked down the road at the little streak of fire. Rio flew out on a motorcycle and sped down the road after going into a ditch just off the road. Rio accelerated as he noticed a familiar figure in the distance and soon passed the Ghost Rider. She made a sudden turn, blocking the rider's route. The rider came to a halt, and he and Rio exchanged glances. Rio and the rider approached each other as she climbed off her bike, the rider matching her actions. You really screwed up, Rio stated to the rider. You let someone with no remorse get away. The rider yanked the chain from over his shoulder and lit it on fire. I'm not here to fight, Rio stated directly into Rider's eyes. I'm here to make a deal. The rider listened as his chain remained lit. Give me my vengeance on Death, Rio replied, shaking her hand. Help me settle my score and I'll settle yours. All of yours. The rider seemed perplexed by this before resting his hand on Rio's shoulder, her body engulfed in flames. I'll get right to it, Batman said, looking around at Robin, Calder, Red Arrow, and Red Tornado. Are we sure there isn't a mole in the team? I'm convinced there isn't, Calder remarked as he took a step forward. When Sportsmaster claimed to have an inside source, he was merely sowing doubt. His intelligence could have come from comparing notes with the other villains working for the Injustice League, Robin joked. I wouldn't count it, Death remarked, stunning everyone by appearing in a corner with a drink in her hand. Don't mind me. I'm just trying to get away from all the Death costumes everyone's wearing. Continue. Well, I'm not convinced, Red Arrow continued. You two and Kid Flash are above suspicion, but I know Artemis isn't telling the truth. For starters, she's not Green Arrow's niece. Obviously, Death remarked as everyone turned to face her. I was there when her parents and siblings were born, and Oliver isn't one of them. Artemis's connections may make her suspect, Batman said as he stood next to his sidekick, but she's still entitled to a secret identity. I'm more concerned about Superboy and Moon Knight. We still don't know what Cadmus programmed into him, and while we cleared Moon Knight earlier, given the fact that she went behind the League's back as well as the recent psych evaluation that Black Canary did, we can't rule her out. No, Death responded swiftly, Naruto would never do anything like that. But even you can't be sure, Red Tornado remarked. From what Reaper told us, you can no longer see or influence Moon Knight by keeping her alive. That was you? Screamed Robin, leaping to his feet. Death groaned and cast a sidelong glance. When you went into Naruto's core memories with Reaper, you saw one where he was on a playground in the middle of a rainstorm with a young girl following him around with an umbrella, correct? Death inquired. Yes, we did, Calder said. Once every 100 years, I take a mortal form so I can see how my actions affect the world, Death explained before taking a sip of her drink. You were the girl who was following Moon Knight that day, Batman realized after connecting the dots. Wait. Robin cried in surprise, you're that Mina Dewan? I had planned to use that one day to try to cheer him up, but he was so depressed that I decided to stay with him, Death explained. I honestly don't think he ever recovered from his parents dying, and even after that, he had to deal with his foster father committing suicide, his foster mother dealing with Alzheimer's, and his foster grandfather being gunned down. So you're saying Rio's mentally unstable, Calder remarked. I fixed what I could after you all got rid of Savitar from inside of him, but it's impossible to tell, Death explained. That's why I had my brother watch over him to keep an eye on how he's doing. Destruction has told us that there are times when Moon Knight vanishes and he doesn't see her for several hours, Red Tornado explained. I'm not surprised, Death said. Naruto has always been very good at not being noticed, and now that he knows magic, he's even better at it. He has a right to privacy, but even going this far is concerning for me. I'll assign Reaper to follow Naruto. Now, I need to talk with one of my other brothers. Death fled before they could even glance at each other. Artemis and Zatanna were riding motorcycles through Manhattan streets when a car passed them. She followed the car out to Brooklyn and into a repair yard, spinning about. Rio got out of the car as Zatanna dismounted her bike and removed her helmet. "Rio, hold up," Zatanna exclaimed as she followed her companion into the yard. "I just want to talk." After what happened with the rider, Rio scoffed as she searched the parts on some shelves. "Fat chance." "We were just worried about you," Zatanna argued, sighing. "You don't have to be," Rio replied as she took a pressure gauge and walked over to her car. "I've made my peace with all of you, and I just want to be on my own for a while." "So, this is where you've been hiding," Artemis stated as she walked into the yard. "I work here," Rio explained as she checked her car's tire pressure. "Besides, you two need to get out of here. I'm just here to make sure we're stocked up and to fix my car's stabilizer." "Do you think you'll rejoin the team?" Artemis inquired. "I'm not sure," Rio responded as she shifted her car into neutral and pushed it onto a lift. "Could you please tell Destruction to stop following me?" After a little while, Artemis and Zatanna mounted their bikes and rode away. "I'm sorry, Zatanna," Rio said before smoke began to pour from her skin. After an hour, Harm gritted his teeth as Artemis kicked him against the backyard fence. A gloved hand smashed through the fence next to Harm's head and drew him through by the shoulder. Harm got up in the middle of the street and stared down the street as a burning chain wrapped around his waist. "No, please," pleaded Harm before the chain was yanked from his wrists, reducing him to ash as he shrieked. Greta looked on in horror as Artemis and Zatanna glanced at the scorch mark that had been Harm. A person moved into view, indicating that it was a female based on the shape of their body, but what astonished them the most was the girl's blazing head. "Another Ghost Rider?" Artemis exclaimed, stunned. Ghost Rider turned to face them and locked his gaze on Greta. Ghost Rider, holding up a little box, murmured something in a language neither of the two surviving females knew before the top opened, revealing a light. Greta yelped as she was dragged against her will ahead. Artemis noticed this and shot an arrow at Ghost Rider, but it was deflected by the female dressed as Batman who had attacked the cave with the Suicide Squad. "Zob, YLF Otni YMDNAH, exclaimed Zatanna as she extended her hand toward Ghost Rider. The box glowed briefly before the light went out. Zatanna and Artemis could only watch in horror as Greta glanced to them for assistance before being pulled into the box, surprised that her magic had failed. The top of the box closed as the rider handed it to the girl next to him, then waved at Artemis and Zatanna before getting into a car with her and driving away. After 10 minutes, Artemis B07, Zatanna Zatara B08 have been identified. "We've got a problem," Artemis stated as they approached Batman, Red Tornado, Calder, and Robin. "There's another Ghost Rider." "What?" Calder asked, surprised. "And this one's a girl," Zatanna continued. "Great," Robin responded angrily. "I'll speak with Constantine and see if he can find a way to track it," Batman stated. "Until then, none of you are to go after the rider." Rio turned off her automobile and lowered the bed it was sitting on. Rio took a deep breath as he climbed into the driver's seat. "You know, I told you to come back after we were done," Naruto stated to the passenger in her car before sighing, "though it's not like you understand a word I'm saying." Rio started her car and drove out of the yard, heading home. After 5 days, Rio and Mina laughed while a nurse checked the equipment and Crypto sat in a corner. "So, you haven't talked to your friends in weeks?" Mina inquired, concerned. "I'm just taking some time off," Rio explained, "and it also means I have more time to spend with you." "But they're your friends," Mina pointed out. Rio sighed and raised her head to gaze at Mina. "Sometimes, you just grow apart from your friends," Naruto continued, "and there comes a time when you just can't be friends anymore." The nurse vanished in a flash just as she was ready to change the IV bag, causing Rio to spring up and Crypto to snarl. "Naruto, what's going on?" Mina inquired. Rio peered out the door and noticed that the entire level was unoccupied. Rio hastily pulled out her phone and called a number, praying the people on the other end would answer. "It's me," Rio said as the other party picked up the phone. "All the adults have vanished from this hospital. Get to my location as soon as possible." Rio hung up the phone and took Mina's hand in hers. "Keep this with you," Rio shouted as she dashed over to a boom tube. "Crypto, make sure she's safe."
"What's going on?" Rio cried as she entered the cave. "We don't know," Robin stated as he turned to face her. Batman and the other adults just disappeared. "This is bad," Rio murmured, running her hands through her hair. Mina's heart condition is getting worse, and Cyborg can only do so much to help her. What are we going to do? Megan wondered. Right now, we need to make sure all the children are safe, Calder stated, looking at Wally and Superboy. Start by setting up a refugee center at the high school. Once the children are safe, we can start figuring out where all the adults are.
Got it, Wally exclaimed as he and Connor dashed out of the cave, Artemis and Megan close behind to assist. Start by seeing if you can contact any of the adult heroes, Calder instructed Robin and Zatanna. Already ahead of you, Rio replied as she scanned the computer while holding a seal to the side. I get the computer, but what are you doing with the seal? Zatanna questioned as they got closer.
I'm trying to reach John or any other member of the JLD besides you, Rio explained before collapsing. Rio, Robin screamed as they all rushed up to her, Calder assisting her to her feet. Are you okay?
I don't know, she hesitated, I just blacked out for some reason. Rio fell down the hall and into a washroom, pushing Calder away. Rio noticed her reflection had burning eyes as the girl in the bat costume fell from the ceiling with Secret, who had lifeless eyes, emerging from the floor.
Look, Rio remarked to her reflection, who wasn't imitating her actions, I'm a little busy with some things right now. You three are going to have to hold on before we do something. That time is coming close. I can feel it.
Rio's reflection began to mimic her movements again, and Secret and the girl faded into the shadows. As Reaper emerged in a seat by the fireplace, Death stood in a library inside the void.
Naruto's been talking to those people that the writer has been with, Reaper explained.
Why would Naruto do something like that? Death wondered out loud.
Mistress, we may have to face the fact that Naruto has been working with Ghost Rider, Reaper said solemnly.
I can't believe that, Sasuke, Death remarked as she shook her head and gazed out a window at the boundless sand that stretched to the horizon. I just can't. And please remove that ridiculous mask. You clearly hurt him a lot more than you realized, Sasuke stated after removing his mask. He probably wouldn't have turned out like this if you had just left him alone in that park. That's exactly it, Destiny replied as he sat on the chair opposite Reaper. What do you want? Death inquired as she stared out the window.
I write the destiny of every living thing, including possible timelines, Destiny explained as he brought out his book. If you'd left him in that park, he'd have gotten over his parents dying a week later.
Death gripped her head as visions from that timeline flashed through her mind. Death wept loudly as she dropped to her knees in tears. Sasuke took out one of his shotguns and pointed it directly at Destiny's face. You know that's not going to work, so why do you even bother trying? Destiny inquired. At the very least, you'll leave us alone, Sasuke murmured as he pressed the trigger, converting Destiny to atoms. He crouched down next to her and let her cry into his shoulder as he walked back over to Death. When Calder appeared behind Rio, she was watching while Zatanna and Robin attempted to call any of the adult heroes. Something on your mind? He inquired. What's going on with everyone? Rio said, I'm technically 25 years old, but I'm still here. The spell that was cast affects everyone over the age of 18, so why am I not with the adults? That does sound suspicious, Calder replied. Have you ever considered the possibility that you were de-aged when you were sent here from your world? Contrary to popular belief, there is no magic that can do that other than the Fountain of Youth, but that thing has been lost for centuries, and not even John has been able to find it, Rio revealed.
So you're saying that something other than the Fountain of Youth forced you to de-age? Calder asked. Exactly, Rio remarked, holding a glass. There are only two people I know of who can do that, and one of them is someone we're all familiar with.
Rio moved deeper into the cave after taking a sip from her goblet when her phone rang. She took it out and looked at it, noting the message on it. For the time being, things are calm. Needs immediate medical attention.
Rio entered Wally's trophy room and glanced at the helmet of fate, quickly texting back a message. She took a big breath and drank strongly from the goblet before it vanished. Rio tapped her foot as she looked over her shoulder, feeling a tremendous amount of remorse for what she was going to do. She grasped the helmet in her hands before elevating it over her head.
What are you doing? Kid Flash said as he entered the room. Rio, taken aback, dropped the helmet and scrambled to pick it up. Are you sure you want to put that thing on again? Kid Flash inquired. I just don't know if Zatanna or I have the power to stop this, Rio remarked, looking into the helmet's eyes before putting it back on the shelf. If it comes down to it, I'm not sure I'll be able to keep myself in control. What are you saying? Kid Flash said confidently. You put the helmet on twice before and you got out okay. That's not it, Rio admitted, shaking her head in shame. I'm worried about Zatanna. It's almost the anniversary of her mother's death, and I don't want her to go through any more pain. But to stop what's happening, I may just have to do that.
You really care about her, don't you? Kid Flash inquired.
I care about all my friends, Naruto smirked, but Zatanna. She's the first person since Mina who makes me want to slow down and enjoy life. Kid Flash swallowed the lump in his throat as he remembered what Death had told them on Halloween. Meanwhile, Rio held up her hand, which became transparent before solidifying again. You're still suffering from speed sickness? Kid Flash inquired, surprised. Like I said before, the only way to fix this is to get my speed back, Naruto lamented, but that's not going to happen. Why not? Kid Flash wondered. Because I don't want it to happen, Rio explained with a sad smile. It's like when someone accepts their cancer diagnosis and just tries to live out the rest of their lives as happily as they can. I've finally accepted that I'm probably never going to live beyond a year on this earth. I just want to spend as much time as I can with Zatanna before it's over.
Rio and Kid Flash looked toward the door as they heard someone clearing their throat and saw Zatanna leaning against it.
I'm ready to try my father's spell, Zatanna murmured hesitantly. They followed Zatanna out of the chamber and into the main area, where the rest of the squad was waiting for them. Rio kissed Zatanna before the magician approached a hologram of the earth and raised her wand.
Etikal Retinocype faux wirecrows, she exclaimed confidently and timidly.
The earth's image slowed, and a red dot appeared over Virginia's coast.
Coordinates locked, Robin stated as he entered the location, Roanoke Island.
You did it, Rio exclaimed, wrapping her arms around Zatanna's waist in a loving embrace. Rio, not now, Zatanna said irritably and arousingly.
There was a flash of lightning and a 10-year-old boy with black hair wearing a red jacket. How did you get here? Calder inquired as they all approached the boy.
Hey, Billy, Rio casually said. You know him? Superboy inquired. Read his mind, replied Rio, smirking. Miss Martian's eyes shone as she focused, but she gasped a second later. He's Captain Marvel, she screamed, surprised. And I'm Speedy Gonzalez, Wally laughed. Look, just because he thinks he's Captain Marvel doesn't mean he is. Geez, Wally, Billy replied smugly, folding his arms. Do I really need to bring you nachos and pineapple juice to get on your good side? Rio stared over her shoulder as Billy explained everything to Wally. Rio narrowed her eyes as she walked down the hall, several lights going out between her and the end of the hall where Reaper stood.
What do you want, Sasuke? Rio inquired as Reaper removed his mask.
Why are you conversing with the rider's comrades? Sasuke inquired. That's none of your business, Rio replied as she approached Sasuke. What I do in my spare time is irrelevant to you.
Becoming the rider yourself isn't very good for you, Sasuke explained.
Rio remained mute as she locked her gaze on Sasuke.
I won't let you continue like this, Sasuke said as Rio grabbed his throat and pushed him against the wall. This won't kill you, but it will take you a while to reform, Rio stated as his gaze shifted to the fire. Sorry, old friend. But I can't let you tell anyone about it. Sasuke instantaneously burst into flames and turned to ash. Rio, what's going on? Why were the lights off, and why does it smell like someone lit a fire? Zatanna inquired when the lights were turned back on.
The wiring must be faulty here, Rio claimed, turning to Zatanna. So, what's Billy say? The adults are on another planet, and we're going to Roanoke as soon as everyone finishes preparing, Zatanna explained. I have something I want to give you, Rio remarked as she removed her necklace from her neck.
She removed the ring, whispered a fast spell to make it fit Zatanna, and placed it on her left ring finger. Rio, Zatanna murmured, looking up at her girlfriend, I'm sorry, but... Rio smiled after placing a finger on Zatanna's lips to calm her. That's not what I mean, Rio clarified as she took Zatanna's hands in her own. It's just a gift, and who knows, it may eventually become what you envisioned. Rio kissed Zatanna on the cheek before walking around her and into a boom tube. Rio arrived at Happy Harbor Hospital via boom tube and passed by the cafeteria, where Raven was using her magic to divert some of the preteens while Starfire assisted the older ones in caring for the others. Rio entered Mina's room, giving Raven a nod and seeing Cyborg tending to the sleeping girl. How's she doing? Rio said, approaching Mina's bedside.
Barely hanging on, Cyborg stated as Rio examined Mina's heart monitor, while Crypto whined, she's got a heart transplant scheduled for the 11th, but she might not make it until then.
Rio stroked Mina's cheek and twisted her finger through her hair.
She'll make it, Rio remarked as she took a crystal necklace from her pocket and placed it in the girl's palm. I'm sure of it.
Rio returned to the door but came to a halt with her hand on the entryway.
The adults will return soon, Rio whispered, a little over her shoulder, just make sure she survives until then. Cyborg then returned to checking Mina's vital signs after she had left. After 10 minutes, Clarion felt something strange and whirled around, erecting a barrier that deflected the boomerangs of Robin and Moon Knight, as well as Artemis arrows.
Is that really the best you can do? He asked. The trio dived out of the line of Clarion's generated lightning just as Superboy, Calder, and Kid Flash charged him from 3 different directions. When the 3 reached the barrier that appeared over the pentagram, they flew away. "Itatavel me ffoeht margatnep," exclaimed Zatanna as she dashed in front of Superboy to throw her spell, which ricocheted off the barrier.
Clarion scoffed, "Baby magic, phi ehsstnawot itatavel osyldab, telephone ray."
Clarion flung Zatanna away with a flick of his wrist. Moon Knight caught her and placed her gently on the ground. She assisted Zatanna to her feet, but she slumped with a groan of anguish. Moon Knight gritted her teeth under her mask as she hastily scanned her body with the nanobots that formed her suit.
"Damn it," she grumbled as she cast a rapid mending spell on the leg before turning to face Zatanna. "Stay back and let us handle it." She went to continue fighting Clarion, who used lightning from the pentagram to strike every member of the squad save her, Superboy, Miss Martian, and Zatanna. "But Artemis," Zatanna cried in surprise. "Robin." Zatanna took a big breath and turned to the side, holding her palm out. She yelled, "Temla fo etaf, laver fleshrui." A massive rock began to slip away, revealing the helmet of fate just behind it. When a bolt of lightning struck several feet away, Billy appeared.
"It's the GE," Billy screamed as Miss Martian covered his mouth to keep him quiet. "Not so loud, Billy," Miss Martian said through the psychic link. "I've telepathically linked you to the others."
"Cool," Billy exclaimed as he turned toward Clarion, who was now suffocating Moon Knight with a vacuum. "It's the gem. In the middle of the pentagram. We win if we destroy it."
Moon Knight observed Zatanna ready to put on the helmet of fate when she was gasping for air. "Be Banch Tenon," Moon Knight exclaimed, shakily stretching out her palm towards Zatanna.
Moon Knight snatched the helmet of fate as it flew out of her hands. "Rio, no," shouted Zatanna, concerned. The dazzling golden light dispelled Clarion's vacuum as Moon Knight slammed the helmet on. Dr. Fate swooped into the air and locked his gaze on Clarion. "Clarion, it's time to put an end to this," Dr. Fate exclaimed.
"Billy, tell Zatara," exclaimed Miss Martian. While Fate and Clarion fired beams at each other, Billy vanished with a bolt of lightning. Clarion eventually broke off the onslaught by hurling bursting balls of magic towards Fate, who flew around each of the blasts. Zatanna could only watch as Fate fought Clarion, while Miss Martian pulled the unconscious Robin and Artemis away from the conflict, and Calder proceeded to assist Kid Flash as he prepared to steal the emerald. Dr. Fate, however, shimmered back to Rio before returning to Fate as she struggled. "There, see," taunted Clarion, "when the world split, the helmet split too. Nabu isn't all there, and you're losing your grip on his power, you pitiful, soon-to-be-dead little girl. You sacrificed yourself for nothing."
"That's what you think, witch boy," Fate remarked as a spinning orb of energy emerged in her hand. "I haven't even begun to show you what I can do with just a fraction of this power."
The sphere's impact on the barrier, combined with Miss Martian's and Calder's blows, began to damage it.
"No," yelled Clarion, falling to his knees as the barrier vanished.
Fate restrained Clarion with an energy onk. "Now, kid," said Calder as he returned his gaze. As he went through the pentagram, Kid Flash rushed forward and grabbed the jewel. "Rio, catch," exclaimed Kid Flash as he skidded to a stop and tossed the gem at Fate.
Fate reached out her hand, seized the gem, and began the spell. "Yam eht out emosib eno ekno aram," chanted Fate as the area was brightly lighted.
Clarion's minions arrived when the light went out and fell unconscious, as did Batman, Zatara, and Captain Marvel. "Well, they don't make evil immortal sorcerers like they used to," Clarion said. He snapped his fingers, causing the onk that was holding him back to dissipate as he dusted himself off and rose to his feet.
"Tikal," Clarion exclaimed. Tikal leapt off Superboy and dashed toward Clarion, his were beast form returning. When he jumped into Clarion's arms, a doorway appeared beside him.
"See you later, alligators," Clarion said to the Justice League members before leaping into the portal, which closed behind him. "Aren't you going to stop him?" Kid Flash yelled to Fate.
"To what end?" Fate inquired. "Clarion is chaos personified. He is uncontrollable." "Fate," said Zatara as he assisted Zatanna up and over to the others. "Rio, it's time to take the helmet off," Zatanna stated.
"No," Fate surprised everyone by saying, "this was the deal we agreed to." The girl puts on the helmet 3 times and becomes the conduit of fate. Her propensity for the mystic arts also makes her an ideal choice.
You can't do that. Artemis yelled fiercely. She has her own life to live. Robin exclaimed. Constantine told me Kent's soul is also in there. Kid Flash said. He would never allow.
Kent Nelson did object strenuously when the girl first put on the helmet, Fate explained, but once we agreed on the terms, I released his soul to death. He's no longer there.
Zatanna began to cry, and Zatara noticed. Take me instead, he remarked, startling everyone. My abilities are already at their peak. My body is physically stronger now, and it can withstand the strain of your might. All true, Fate said, but what guarantee do I have that if I remove the helmet, you'll put it back on? My word, Zatara said as he muttered a spell. Fate landed on the ground and took off his helmet. Rio staggered for a second before catching herself as she turned back. Dad, don't, Zatanna begged, holding up the helmet. He gave his daughter one final hug before handing her over to Rio in exchange for the helmet of Fate. They clung to Zatanna as she donned the helmet and transformed into Dr. Fate. Your plan worked, Fate murmured to Rio before turning to face Clarion's followers and said, leave these to the Fates. Fate and the villains vanished in a flash of light as he drew them up into the air with him. What did he mean by that? Superboy wondered as everyone turned to stare at Rio, who quickly finished healing Zatanna's leg before walking away from her. After Kent was sent to the afterlife, Fate and I made an additional condition to the deal. Rio sighed. If he would let me remain in control, I would get him Zatara as his host.
So you used me to get close to my father? Zatanna questioned bitterly. Yes, Rio stated flatly, adding you to the JDL, becoming your girlfriend, all of it was to get Zatara to eventually agree to become Fate's host. When Rio turned around, she was met with a smack by Zatanna, who then threw her ring back at her and stormed off. Rio went into a boom tube after picking up the ring. The following day, Rio stood there watching Zatanna refuse to acknowledge her existence while shifting her belongings into a room in Mount Justice. Rio collapsed against a wall and sobbed into her knees as she walked down a separate hall. She had no idea that Wally had followed her and was watching her cry. To be continued.
That's it for this podcast. Thanks for listening to this video. If you did enjoy this part of the story, like, share, and subscribe for more. And thank you all for helping support, and have a great day.